Okay, on to gameplay for Victory at Waterloo by Tactics. First and foremost, feast your eyes on this set of armies. Pretty complex. Again, there's about not even 50 counters going on here. You've got the French, you've got the British, and you've got the Prussians. The British and the Prussians comprising the coalition forces. These other counters up here, I'll show you what they're about in a second when I flip it over. You'll notice some pretty nice illustrations there, but only one number. That number is used for both attack and defense. The way combat is resolved in this game is that in the basic game, adjacent counters combat each other. If this infantryman were going against, say, that infantryman with a 1, you would have a +1 advantage. You'd take into account any terrain benefits, and then you'd roll a die. And then that would be resolved on this very elegant, i.e. simplistic attack results table. So if an attacker is destroyed, you remove the counter. If a defender is destroyed, you remove the counter. If an attacker retreats, you have to back off 1 hex. Defender retreats, they defend likewise. The rule is that you have to retreat into terrain that requires the least movement points. Other than that, it's a straightforward retreat. There is this one rule here that if the die roll is a 1, the attacker may treat it as an exchange, and in an exchange, it's counter for counter. Or if there's multiple attacks, you have to equate the combat force of the attacking unit with as many counters as you can get to in the combat force of the defending unit. Movement is handled by that little movement table. 3 types of units, 3 movement scores, and those movements, of course, are referring to hexes. All right, so very, very simplistic combat resolution, very simplistic movement. The movement and the combat is, well, let me get it from this way, is modified by these terrains, of which there are 8. Very straightforward in how they're applied. They influence both the movement and these combat effects. There are some interesting notes here about, bridges crossing streams and things, but absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. In terms of how the game is won or lost, you'll notice that there are these tracks that go along each side. And for the British player, they control both the British and the Prussian. And for the French player, you can see over there they have theirs. Well, basically, you start at 0 for the British and the Prussians. You start at 3 for the French. And anytime a counter is lost, or you must retreat from a key town or target on the map, you then move this up the track by 1. So let's say you lost a counter here and this guy had to retreat. You'd go from 3 to 4 to 5. Then you would mark that, and that would be your starting position on the next turn. Once you start moving up the track, you can experience this here, which is demoralization. And that basically means that if you attack with a unit and they win, you can't advance into the hex that you attacked. And then if you get up to this, disintegration, you're now dealing with a situation where the unit cannot attack, which in this game is very simply moving adjacent to a French unit. And once you are disintegrated, there's no going back. So in the case of retreating from a key town, if you were to then retake it and you were here, you could move it back 1. So you've just saved yourself a little face. The win condition is achieving a rout on either side in the 10 turns allowed. That's it. Now, you can achieve a tactical victory by having moving your opponent further up the chain than you yourself have been moved. But by and large, you're pushing people to a rout condition. I haven't even bothered to punch these yet. However, I you know, and I needn't to illustrate the combat, but I do want to point out the flip side of this. You'll notice that each counter on the back has a letter and number designation. Now that letter and number corresponds to the row of, or I guess this would be column north-south, of hexes. So this counter, for example, M2 would enter from the French side, M, and be 1, 2 hexes in from the board. Those are the starting positions of the units. The Prussians come in by game turn, and they enter from this edge of the board at their discretion. Now, why this is, I was about to say problematic. It's not problematic. It just simply means that there's really only one scenario in the game. So unlike a game like Battle Cry, for example, that has a book of scenarios that you play on the same map with the same activities, you are basically fighting the same battle over and over. So I would equate this to a game of chess in a way. More than anything else. Its simulation value, I would say, is probably minimal. It does expose you to the armies and some of the key units. And I'll talk about that in the final video.